Loading. All
We're
right.
live.
Yep, we're live. All right. So just to give a quick introduction for anyone, probably Mark, Danton, and the rest of our book club, apparently, because they're not going to come. We are reading, or we are reviewing, the Red Chapter Mechanism from Stephen Pepper's World Hypotheses, which is Chapter 9 today, May 5th, 2014. Currently, it is Jake and I. We apparently just lost a man. Cameron is gone. I also haven't heard from Ryan. I haven't heard from Mark. I haven't heard from Dominic. I don't know who else. Who else was supposed to be here, Jake? Anyone that you can think of?
Val said he didn't read, so he's not coming.
And Anita also is not responding.
What about Amy?
Amy did not want to participate.
Okay.
Okay. This is Brohavior. All right. Well.
Oh, that is lightning.
You see, I told you.
Soccer might get canceled, Grant.
Let's hope. Because we want to read instead. Reading is good. Okay. So you were asking about formism, and where was it? Okay. First, let's start with mechanism really quick. What is the root metaphor of mechanism?
The root metaphor of mechanism?
Yeah, man.
That, shit.
I'll give you a hint. It is the first sentence of page 186.
The root metaphor of mechanism is a machine. Excellent.
So, and you didn't read. You said you didn't read the formism chapter.
I did not.
Okay. But he did talk about root metaphors. Did you read the root metaphor chapter?
I read part.
Okay. So basically, the root metaphors we were kind of talking about. Anita gave the metaphor, I guess, so to speak, that the root metaphor is sort of like the spirit animals. So when we look at any event, we will look at them in light of the sort of overall root metaphor. So, for example, if the root metaphor mechanism is machine, then when we look at an event in our universe, we're going to look at it sort of like a machine, that it's got discrete parts that twist and turn and function, and those parts work together to create the machine. And he starts with what he calls the simple machine, where you have the lever and the fulcrum.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that there are more complex machines now, and it's sort of referring to what will eventually become computers with the electromagnetic fields and the electricity and stuff like that.
Yep.
But I think that even though those are vastly more complex systems, I think the metaphor still applies just as easily. And you take the fact that those are also made up of individual pieces that work together, and they're really, even if there are superfluous pieces, and there probably aren't very many of them, that you can always break an event down into smaller chunks, and that those chunks have a function within the system. Does that make sense?
Huh. Did you just freeze?
Did you just freeze?
No, I'm good.
Okay. So does that sort of make sense using that root metaphor of the machine?
Yeah.
Okay.
I completely. Yes.
You completely yes. I like it.
Well, I kind of just went in and read it. I didn't, and then I kind of made notes going on throughout it.
Cool.
How you need a balance. There's a push and a pull, and they're always equal, and that depends on the location of everything. Depends on the location of the fulcrum. If we're still going on the machine
Sure.
analogy.
There he is.
So.
Prodigal son returns. Cameron.
I'm back.
Yeah.
Back.
Why did you go?
Someone called me on Skype.
That is unacceptable.
Unacceptable.
Big gulp, huh? Well, see you later.
Oh, see you later.
Forget if I showed you that or not.
Is this a GIF you made?
It is a GIF I made. How'd you know?
One of your many GIFs.
Uh-huh.
I should just call you Jiffy Pop from now on.
So, can we move to the? Are we going? Are we just gonna go through the points, like the two poles of mechanism, the mechanistic root of metaphor?
Well, I think so. You know what's surprising to me is, given the fact that I consider myself a contextualist from what I know about contextualism, a lot of this chapter made an enormous amount of sense to me. I agreed with
Right.
so much of it.
I do too.
And so, yeah, so it was like, there was all these things. I'm like, well, wait a minute now. What if I was misunderstanding this from the beginning? And maybe I need to take a closer look. Now, I think we still need to get through the contextualism chapter to really understand. And to me, the pragmatic truth criterion still makes the most sense. But one of the things, there's a few things I think I tried to underline to get to them that we'll sort of talk to. But one thing I thought we probably should know is the way he breaks down the mechanistic categories, the primary and the secondary categories.
Yes.
So, what are your thoughts on those?
He went on to say how you can't have the secondary qualities without the primary qualities, and you can't have the primary qualities without the secondary qualities.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what principle was? No.
Is that the thing where the primary stuff are the only things that are relevant to the efficiency of the machine?
Yeah,
Secondary qualities are everything else that aren't relevant.
but then he goes in later on in the chapter to say the secondary qualities are the only thing that matter.
Not I think the only thing that matter, but that you can't. That they are important, and you can't have them separated from the primary qualities. Because as he says on page 193, he's describing the qualities. They're observed in parts of the machine, but are not directly relevant to its action. So we have to consider the fact that the primary quality is directly relevant to its action, where he's talking about things like the field of location and the laws that hold everything together. That those things all have to be present as well. You can't just have those secondary qualities. And what does he describe, Jake, or either of you, as being secondary qualities?
Like what it looks like, the shape, the
fatigue in your arm when you exert force down on a fulcrum or a lever. The smell of the tree stump.
Yeah.
Yes. Details of cosmetic machine described through the primary categories come entirely from the material within the secondary category. Wait, no. Nope.
Funny.
Three categories.
I mean, Cameron, you're correct that those are some of the descriptions of the secondary qualities.
Mm-hmm.
So, Jake, I'm not sure what you're looking for right now.
I don't know. I was reading on 195.
Okay.
But that goes into more of like the details of the cosmetic machine described through the primary categories comes entirely from the material within the secondary categories. So, are the secondary categories like the color of the tree stump or the texture of the tree stump? It's not actually the tree stump.
That will be part of the secondary. So that will be, I think, number 4, where he's talking about on 194, where he's listed all 6. Number 4, the secondary qualities. I think that includes those sort of features of the objects. But then the 5th of the bracket secondary categories. Number 5, a principle for connecting the secondary qualities with the first 3 primary or effective categories.
Wait,
So
what page is this on?
194, at the very top, where he's basically listed from 193 to 194. He's listed the 6 categories broken down into brackets of one.
Oh, yes, primary categories, secondary categories.
Right, and so in the secondary categories, the secondary qualities, and those are the things I think you were talking about, which are the formal features of the objects. And then there are these other secondary categories, though, that are interesting, where it's a principle for connecting the secondary qualities with the first 3 primary or effective categories, and then 6 laws, if any, for regularities among secondary qualities, secondary laws. So basically, number 6 supports number 5. Number 5 supports number 4, and number 4 is inextricably linked to 1 through 3.
Yeah. But his main beef with this world hypothesis is there's a gap between the secondary and primary categories. And that gap is his beef.
That's what he sees as the primary inadequacy. So, like, a world hypothesis, as he talked about earlier in the book, is going to have infinite scope. And even though it has infinite scope and it can deal with any subject matter within its scope, including another world hypothesis that someone else might have, it might not have perfect adequacy. You know, there is no perfect worldview.
Because there is no perfect worldview. I feel like there isn't one.
Exactly. And I think that's sort of the point he's trying to make, is that although this is how this worldview is structured, it has these strengths, here's this criterion, here's this rubric before, but here's where it might be considered, here's where the inadequacies lie. And you can't resolve those inadequacies without turning into another world hypothesis. And then that world hypothesis is going to have inadequacies. And you can't resolve them unless you turn to another one. So they're never going to be perfect, because there is no such thing as perfect.
Right.
You can only have the highest amount of precision and the highest amount of scope possible given their root metaphor and your truth criterion, and just have to allow for the fact that there's going to be inadequacies, because
what you're okay with leaving out.
Exactly. Beautifully said. I like it. Cameron, I don't know if you know, but you're muted. I'm going to unmute you. Okay. Did you mute yourself on purpose?
Yes.
Okay, I'll mute you again. You're muted now. No one wants to talk to you. Just kidding. But unmute yourself if you're ready to contribute. Okay, so excellence. That was good. I have this page dog-eared for some reason. Okay, so here is a section of this that I really agreed with what he was saying, and I think this is something that I believe. So the idea is that time can be well, actually, this part I don't agree with. The idea is that time can be truly described or designated without any reference to space. I disagree, or that doesn't make sense to me. A point or locus of space without any reference to any other point. The shape, texture, mass of an atom without any reference to date or place. One atom without reference to any other atom. And a law of nature without reference to the atoms that obey it, and vice versa. It is absolute mechanism. In such a universe, almost anything might have been different, because almost everything is independent of almost everything else. This part I agree with. If this atom happened somewhere else at another time, and there is no necessary reason why it might not have been, it would not have been hit by that atom. Or if instead the law of inertia or unaffected bodies that were a law of acceleration or deceleration, which might well have been, then also this collision would not have occurred. But since this atom did happen to be at this place in time and had been obeying law of inertia, it was inevitable that the collision should have occurred, which is basically, and he harps on this a lot, that mechanism clings to determinism. That basically there are these laws in the universe that govern the way that things behave, and so once things have happened, you really can't say that they could have happened any other way because of all of the laws that govern the fact that they got there. Which is not to say that we're in some inevitable path, but just the fact that the laws govern the way that things occur, such that once it has occurred, there really is no other way that it could have occurred. Does that make sense?
Why doesn't that mean we're on some predetermined path?
For at least that were, that would be teleological. To say that basically we're driven towards a destiny, which I think is the logical fallacy. And the other reason escapes me now, even though I had it in my head when I started talking.
You don't think time can stand alone?
Alone in relation to space? No, I don't think so. I don't think that space and time can stand alone from one another. I also don't think that those are concepts that we have a very good handle on.
I agree. I also think time is what controls everything.
What is time, Jake?
Exactly.
See, I don't think that time is a thing. I think that it's something we invented.
You think we invented time?
Yeah.
Okay, how about maturation? I don't know if I'm saying that word right.
But that's affected by a whole bunch of variables like gravitational pull, heat,
but
exposure to
all those things have to, for lack of a better term, my vocabulary is not that huge right now, grow. And to be able to grow, you need time.
Yeah. If we made up time, then how come all our x-axes are time? Huh?
because we made it up. That's exactly why they are time, is because we invented that concept. We decided that when one event happens and another event happens, and those events don't seem to happen right next to each other, but one appears to precede the other, that the fact that one appears to have preceded the other must be time. And it's I think it's a very useful thing that we've invented, but I think it is a hypothetical construct.
I think it's inevitable that we were gonna invent time. One, because there's death, there's birth, there's death, there's birth, there's death, lifetimes.
I don't know if inevitable is the word I would use. I think that it was highly likely that we would come under the control of those variables. Highly likely.
How come I can't remember things that haven't happened yet, but I can remember things that have happened?
Why would you be able to remember things that haven't happened yet? That seems like a contradiction in terms.
Because, I mean, isn't that how... isn't that a pretty good argument for time?
I don't think so.
Why not?
Well, so I just finished reading this book by Stephen Hawking called A Brief History of Time. Are you familiar with that one? I'll assume no, since neither of you answered.
Question.
What?
What was the question?
Oh, I read this book called A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking.
I have not, but I have listened to Stephen Hawking talk about time.
Okay. How about you, Cameron?
No.
So he describes in this book, according to, I think, quantum theory or quantum mechanics, that time is, in the way that it makes most sense is that time has a finite edge but has no beginning and no end, like a sphere. Like a sphere has this finite edge but no beginning and no end.
So time's a bubble.
I think it's just best thought of in the fact that, so if you ever think about time and we measure like how long it would take to get from one place to another, and we measure that in years, we're basically saying that our standard of measurement is approximately how long it takes our planet to swing around our sun, right?
Yes.
But they've also, according to their theoretical concepts, which make sense based on our assumptions and our observations, that the amount of gravity that is exerted upon something changes how quickly or how slowly that event changes. So, for example, that is why in a black hole, time either stops or slows down or changes altogether, supposedly, is because the amount of gravity that's exerted upon the thing that goes into a black hole is so powerful that that time behaves differently within the black hole. So it's a construct that's affected by other variables. It's not a constant. The only reason that we can think about it is because we've invented a concept to deal with the fact that things change.
It's relative.
It is relative. That is exactly right. That is the general theory of relativity. Well, that is not exactly, but general theory of relativity basically states that time is relative. We're just working with a kid who, whenever you give him instruction, he'd do this. It's really
That's
fun.
cool. Mark and I were talking with each other on the phone and realized we were late to this.
Yes,
Yeah, half an hour late, slacker.
actually even more, because Jake and I tried to get started it an hour ago because was going to have a soccer game that looks like is no longer going to happen.
Yes.
But
Tried to tell Mary what a slacker you are, Ryan.
so anyway,
Good thing she's not here.
by the way, Ryan, we are recording this because I told Mark D that we would try and do that for him.
I saw it's live on my Google feed. I was watching you guys live for the last like 5 minutes because I couldn't join.
Oh,
Uber.
well,
Dude, you guys are fucking putting it public.
it's true. It's
Can
true.
you guys add Mark? How do I add someone?
Yeah, I'll do it really quick. Do you want me to add from Dominic's account? Dominic,
I actually need to go, guys.
dude.
I'm sorry.
All right, well, come back and watch this recording.
I will.
I'm gonna talk so much shit about you.
Time doesn't have a beginning or an end, so just come back.
See what happens.
Yeah. What you need to do is skip the time that's gonna pass and just be back here, and then put that time off later.
All right. I'll go travel through a black hole somewhere and,
Excellent.
freeze everything.
That is what I'm requesting of you.
Okay.
All right. Have fun.
Peace out, man.
Anyway, Cameron, I feel like I digressed quite a bit. I wasn't trying to divert this away from the book as much as it got diverted from, but just the fact that I think I don't think that we can ever separate the concepts of space and time. So
Fair enough.
so the next part in this chapter. Hey Ryan, did you read this chapter?
No, I'm like the worst guy ever. So I was gonna open up and tell you, no matter what I do, I just can't. Like all my shit, dude. I just feel bad. I want to read and know everything in this book, and all I'm doing is I have like a list of everything I need to do. And as much as I want that up here, I have to keep kicking it down, and it hurts. And I'm gonna
Really,
try. I'm gonna try reading more this weekend. This weekend, my sister will be in town, but I'm gonna have some like beach time, I think, and some time. Like I'm not doing anything else except for time with my sister, and then reading some fucking world hypotheses and reading behavior emails. So,
Ryan, do you have a reading schedule that you adhere to, or
yes, the problem is like, dude, and I'm consuming like 50, 60 pages a night, but it's just not this stuff right now. Like I read the first chapter over again, and it made so much more sense. And I was going through it slower, and I took your recommendations on stuff, and it's helping. It's just I gotta get through more, and you guys are going fast, so.
we're blazing through this. There's a lot, and I feel like when he opened up this book, it was just so easy to follow. His arguments just made so much sense. And as we've gone further in, he draws upon those same arguments to build more complex systems. And they've gotten really difficult sometimes to follow, where he leaps from one premise to another. And if I go back and check, it all links up with things that we essentially agreed to as readers early on. But it's like it requires so many higher levels of complexity that it gets really dense, I feel like, in these chapters. But
yeah,
I feel like there's the thing that I like doing, the big enduring themes questions that I always want to come back to. And I like hitting the particulars of the chapter. Like, I want to kind of draw the things out that we really liked. But the thing that I really want to do is say, how do we apply this to a behavior or to behavior analysis in general? And do we think that his treatment of this world hypothesis shows us that this is an adequate worldview? Like, based on the way this is laid out, is there something missing? Is this complete? Is there too much? Like, what do we think about this? Are there maybe other worldviews?
Are you talking about worldviews in general or a specific one?
In general.
Okay.
So I think
they all suck except for the pragmatic one. I mean, it's that simple.
Very simple indeed. So one of the things he mentions a lot about is that, so in formism, your basic truth criterion is is a similarity, and the root metaphor is similarity, and the truth criterion is correspondence. But the fact that in formism you only have particulars, and there is the ideal form of a thing, but you only ever interact with particulars. So it seems like formism is a sort of necessarily metaphysical world, or worldview, or would have that sort of approach. And
I have been reading this.
Attaboy! I scanned the chapter. Did you see? The Linda chapter?
What was it?
Varieties of Scientific Contextualism.
I can't. So some of my readings I have been doing have been on functional contextualism and stuff. So I am still getting some philosophical stuff. So I feel like every week these have been a little bit useful to me.
Basically, the contextualism chapter is going to make a lot of sense to you when we get there.
Yeah, and you haven't told me you haven't told me to leave yet, so I just keep showing up without reading like an asshole. So
I would rather have people show up than not. Though the reading, while it would be helpful, is less of a concern than your attendance. So this is one of our lower turnouts. It has been just Mark and I discussing before, but I'm glad that you guys are here, even if you haven't read. Yeah, so basically, with mechanism, what I was telling them before, Ryan, is the fact that there's a surprising number of things in this chapter that I found myself agreeing with. And one of the last things that I read before we got in this enormous digression about time was the fact that he says something about... what I was saying is that mechanism appears to be, according to this, highly deterministic, which doesn't totally jive well with some of the things I've understood about mechanism, but I could be wrong. So anyway, they very much cling to determinism. So there's basically all these laws in the universe that govern everything that happens, so that it could be the case that anything could be anywhere at any given time. But the fact that two objects are where they are, and then they interact with each other in the way that they interact, is governed by the laws that exist, because there are laws that exist that govern all of these bodies. And so we assume that there's this deterministic universe. I think that's part of the assumption of science in general, and apparently a part of a mechanistic assumption as well, which doesn't mean that it's not also a part of contextualism, but we just haven't gotten there yet. So anyway, it assumed to be this deterministic thing, and I thought that it made a lot of sense to me. The fact that once an event has occurred, that there's no other way that that event could have occurred, because by the time it got there, all of the variables that could have come into a play to affect whether or not that variable or that event happened they did. Like, those things happened. So there's no, basically what I'm saying is there's no change in the past, because once an event has happened, it happened the way that it had to happen based on the laws that govern our universe. And I think that that is inherent in a deterministic assumption.
Mm-hmm.
Does that still not sit well with you, Cameron? Cameron is confused about why I can't remember the future.
I got
What
a question
implications
for you
does that
guys.
have to say that once something happens, it couldn't have happened any other way?
I think it is a bold statement, and I understand why you would be concerned with it.
But
I
you can't change it.
Right.
I don't know how else to say it and make it sound more friendly.
It's just confusing to me to say, like, things aren't predetermined, so things could happen however, but once they happen, they could have only happened that way.
So, okay, let me, it's not to say that things couldn't happen that will alter the way things would happen, but once they have occurred, like, you have to assume that there were laws set in motion that govern the fact that they got to that point.
So if you knew these laws, you could predict exactly where it was going to go beforehand.
If you knew those laws and you had the amount of control necessary, I think.
What do you mean control?
Well, you have to be able to account for the interaction of all variables. And then also we have to be able to discuss what we mean by predict, which I think is something that we have less of a grasp on than we like to believe that we do.
Control of morphological factors, the context, the actual stimuli, the biochemical and biophysical interactions, all that stuff.
Exactly. Precisely. So, I'm sorry, Cameron. I'm not.
Hashtag whoa.
That was very, yes. That was extremely. That was definitely very glow. That was just entirely glow, actually.
Yep.
Cameron, I feel like I'm doing a bad job. I don't want to mislead you into thinking that I'm crazy, or you might already. And I also don't want to say something that's so confusing that you think that I just can't possibly be right about it either.
Cameron, Scott's not wrong. So now that you have two people with Scott's rightness, you just need to jump on the bandwagon.
Truth baker. Dang, that's like, I missed it. Missed the opportunity to.
I got a question for y'all. Have you guys you guys have talked about formism already in the book, right?
Mm-hmm.
We did. It got kind of a cursory treatment, unfortunately. I'm going to go back and look at it again, probably on the plane, but we did hit it again.
Is someone like Jack Michael a formist?
That is a fantastic question, and I don't have a good answer for you. But I kind of think we should talk about it. And so...
Because the correspondence between words and the real things to which they refer is truth, right?
Yeah.
And the goal of the analysis is to know the categories or classes of things, which is kind of freaky because it's almost like we do that too, to an extent.
Sure.
So, like, if you're a nosologist, which is a person who classifies things, right?
I believe so, but I'm not totally sure.
Ah, the one word I've got over Scott. It's happened. It's happened.
What is your word?
Nosologist. That's a person who classifies shit, right? Is that right?
I don't fucking know.
Ah, I got marks too.
You get me on tons of words. I don't know any words.
So
I got you on spelling, but
I'm a context guy, Ryan.
all right. Mark, my question was Jack Michael subscribed to formism?
Does Jack Michael conform to formism?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they're supposed to be functional parameters. So my first thing would be no. Jack Michael is a contextualist. I would say. Now, I think Jack Michael falls in the same camp as Skinner, and he can either be interpreted as a contextualist or a mechanist, depending.
Oh, quiet. We lost Mark.
Your audio went out, Mark.
It did?
Oh, there it is. Start again. So he could. It's like Skinner's. He could
We
either
should
be
ask him real
interpreted
quick
as a
before he dies.
contextualist.
Because I don't think that Jack Michael has created a system. I think it just as Skinner's radical behaviorism, the only thing he's done is he's made novel constructs inside of that system. But he's still operating that system.
Well, in the second ACT book, they say in the behavioral sciences, some forms of personality theory or nosology are built on just a set of assumptions. So when I read that, I was just a little confused. Are we, when we classify shit, I guess if we're going purely off a function, then we're all right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And you could still tie it back to contextually. But you're going to have to classify it. I mean, you can't don't charge yourself with trying to create the first science that doesn't classify anything, because then you'll just be locked in a room babbling to yourself. That probably would be so good, but I don't advise you to do that, Ryan.
I'm not going to. I appreciate the advice, though.
Okay, cool.
So, Mark, I don't know if you know, this week we read Chapter 9, the Mechanism chapter, which means that next week is the Contextualism chapter. So, did you know that already?
No, I had no idea. I don't know where we're at.
Okay. So we read the Mechanism chapter, and we decided that we're all mechanists now.
But you're all mechanists?
I'm just
Why?
kidding.
Gotcha.
I'm just messing with you. But there were a surprising number of
Don't
things.
play jokes like that on the old man, Scott. You might startle me to death.
I was saying there were a lot of things in this chapter that made a lot of sense to me, and one of the ones is the fact that this he talks about mechanism being really relying on determinism, and there are a lot of things about determinism. Well, obviously, determinism is an assumption of the scientist, and so there were a lot when he talks about things in determinism that made a lot of sense to me.
Right.
And he also has this other statement, which sounds... I'm just going to read this section really quick, because this is something I found myself liking. If there's no reliable correlation between physical structures and mental states, then not only can we not predict or infer mental states from the physical structures, but worse, we cannot infer the physical structures from the mental states. And this is very bad, because our only human knowledge of the physical structures is on evidence of our mental states. The mechanist's dread of the mind-body problem is well-founded. It is a threat to the integrity of the mechanistic categories.
Yes.
Good.
Good reading, Scott. I'm proud of you.
Okay. So anyway, yeah, he talks...
That you liked. Why did you like that passage?
Well, you know, we had talked, first of all, I was thinking about the fact that Steve, in an article, describes cognitive psychology as being necessarily mechanistic when it relies on hypothetical structures that are, I guess, what I would think of as being mental states, but maybe I'm reading that wrong out of this book. And so when he talks about the fact that we can't infer physical structures from, or mental states from physical structures, I am completely 100% on board with that statement.
Okay. Cool. So you just found yourself agreeing?
Yeah. So, and that appears to be a problem of the mind-body duality.
Right.
So,
And how does what he's talking about relate to reductionism?
That's also what Guo says, by the way,
Right.
like verbatim.
well, it seemed to me that this would say that we can't use reductionism to get to our subject matter, or that subject matter is, or that reductionism cannot be successfully accomplished. It doesn't follow from your analysis to reduce it to another state.
I don't think that's what that's saying at all. Read it again.
Okay. If there is no reliable correlation between physical structures and mental states, then not only can we not predict or infer the mental states from the physical structures, but worse, we cannot infer the physical structures from the mental states. And this is very bad because our only human knowledge of the physical structures is on evidence of our mental states. And then he talks about the mind-body problem again.
Yeah, walk that part out. That's important.
Okay, the mechanist's dread of the mind-body problem is well-founded. It is a threat.
So when you gave your summary of it, I think you stepped outside of what he's doing, right? And so what he's doing is he's classifying these systems of assumptions. And so when he's talking about the system of assumption, you want to be careful not to pull in your baggage of, we can't do that, that's not proper science because of X, Y, and Z. What he's saying is it makes complete logical sense on why they have to do this in order to make their assumptions work.
So
Does that make sense?
So you're making the case that what he, you know, I had actually thought about that as I was reading some of these, that he would make these statements, and I'm like, I feel like I'm supposed to be reading these as if these were statements that the formist or the mechanist were making. And so,
so he's saying when you criticize this, it's a pointless criticism inside of that system because it's a necessary part of the system.
okay.
You can't be mechanistic without reducing these things.
So, hold on. This is very important then. Basically, the mechanist necessarily has to reduce the mental states to the physiological structures.
I don't think I've seen any mechanistic accounts of human behavior that have not done that. No.
And I think he even talks about reducing it further to the atomic elements, or the elements, and then the atom, and then the components of the atom.
Right, and then you get into the problem of the ultimate science is physics. So once you get beyond that, you could reduce it all to physics. So the ultimate truth is physics. And that's where you get into a problem from the account of sciences and the relations across sciences.
Hey, that's where I am.
Yeah, I think that's very, very common. And it's one of the most common things, is that there's this hierarchy inside of your subject matter, and then there's this hierarchy of sciences. And as you get farther away from physics, you get less and less and less on the hierarchy. So even if you think that behavior analysis can be a science, it's a very low science because it's so far away from the master science of physics.
So wouldn't it kind of not make sense then for a mechanism to embrace anything other than the closest thing to physics? Because they'd be necessarily putting themselves in a position of weakness until they got closer to physics.
Well, when he said that mechanism and contextualism often go together, right? Or mechanism and formism, I think that was the other two that went together.
Yeah.
He's saying that to find these in pure states is almost impossible.
Okay.
So it's going to be very rare that you find a pure mechanist, right? Most of them are going to have a formistic or a contextualistic flair to them. Just like it's very unlikely that you're going to find a pure contextualist. Most of them are going to have a mechanistic flair to them, right?
Right.
So this, I think, is interesting because I think it's showing that the blend of these systems is really what you're going to be interacting with when you're interacting with people who actually use them. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. To me it does.
Okay.
So is Cameron a mechanist with a contextualist flair?
Yes. And I think that we're slowly getting him closer and closer and closer to the contextualist with the mechanistic play.
Well, unfortunately, you should hear the quotes he read to me earlier. Can't read
Oh, they're beautiful.
Where do I stand?
This is.
Can
It's.
I read them? Can I read them? I get like all warm and fuzzy feeling when I read them.
Oh, hi, bothered.
Huh?
Read 'em.
Try.
Tomorrow, what we'll do is we'll see how fuzzy you are now, and then tomorrow we read them and I'll punch you. And we'll have you read them again next week. See how fuzzy you get.
I'm verbal. I can push through it. that pain will take on like appetitive functions.
You're what?
Yeah.
You're what? What was that word?
Appetitive?
No, you're
Verbal.
You're what? Verbal. I'll add some verbiage before I hit you to that. It'll be the same word over and over again. It'll be
That'll just
something
make me a
really
martyr.
common. It'll be something common too.
From a
Wait, I
voice.
thought you were gonna
I'll
read-
say,
Hey, stop it, boy. Boy.
I'll say, Cameron, Cameron, Cameron. And every time, Mark's like, Cameron,
Right. Stop it.
not Cameron.
Right.
Lynch.
He's so excited.
Stop it, right? Cameron Reed. What does a man read?
I can't read your quotes.
All right, cool. So they're from the Linda Hayes article talking about the differences between radical behaviorism and inner behaviorism. And these are two quotes from B.F. Skinner himself. First one is, the
Wow.
physiologist of the future will be able to show how an organism is changed when exposed to contingencies of reinforcement, and why the changed organism then behaves in a different way, possibly at a much later date. Beautiful.
And why did you like that?
Huh?
And why did you like that?
Because that's what I think.
Did you read the rest of the article?
Huh?
Finish the- Or did you
Yeah,
just stop?
it was very confusing and scary. That one
Huh?
felt nice and safe.
Did you finish it? No. The
Not
article?
yet. So you better change my opinion quick.
So finish.
That's why it was such a good article yesterday. You told me that, huh?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So that's probably one of the biggest beefs that most contextualists have with Skinner, is that he falls back on this. Oh, we're just going to reduce it down to physiology now.
What's wrong
And
with
that
that?
movement has brought a lot of flack. And I think that everyone sitting at this meeting, besides you, are on the side of flack.
I think I knew that.
Yeah, you're verbal.
All right, let's hear
Okay,
your
let me read the
quote.
second one. It's even better.
There is such a thing.
This is what I was saying at the sushi restaurant, Ryan, when we had our debate.
Oh,
You hear that? Skinner's on my side. He would have been sitting on my side of the table.
he would have been wrong. You okay with hearing that, or does that make you not feel fuzzy?
So he said, when we can observe the momentary state of the organism, we shall be able to use it instead of the history responsible for it in predicting behavior. We should then know what it means to say that some part of such an account explains another part. Wow.
The fuck does that mean in lay terms? Like, what's that?
It
Like,
means
what's
you won't have to look at history of reinforcement. You can just look at the brain.
Okay. Say it again.
The quote, or what I just said?
No, read your quote again.
Okay. When we can observe the momentary state of the organism, we shall be able to use it instead of the history responsible for it in predicting behavior.
Okay, and you think that state means the physiology of the organism.
Yeah.
Interesting. What book is that from?
Something published in 1969.
Good.
Let's see.
Contingencies of reinforcement.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, have you ever read the Chomsky articles?
Yeah.
Did you read how easy it is to take quotes from Skinner and put them out of context?
Yeah.
Okay. I want you to read read the 3 pages going up to that and the 3 pages after that.
Oh,
Homework.
that doesn't sound like it's gonna be good for me.
You're verbal.
You dug yourself a really fun ditch with that.
Perfect.
Ryan's just going to say it all day long.
Oh, dude. And I see him for like 8 to 10 hours a day, so it's just fucking awesome.
All right, I have a thing I want to read out of this because I want to see if my interpretation of this is similar to others. So he says on page 229, right near the end of the chapter, so it's about halfway down that first full paragraph, we then propel our organism about the environment to find out whether there are any configurations in the world that will directly stimulate this physiological attitude, and so bring up the correlated words in our sentence or the correlated shapes and colors in our perception. If this happens, we call our sentence or idea true. If not, and if we think we have sufficient evidence to believe that this attitude will never be externally stimulated, we call our sentence or idea false. The way that sounded to me was almost exactly what the hypothetical deductive model is.
Yes, and that's what that next sentence says. The construction and verification of a hypothesis about the structure of the hydrogen atom is no different in principle.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Solid.
So the mechanistic approach is also going to be very favorable towards a hypothetical deductive model.
Yes, I think so. It's when you ask questions that way, it sets the stage of the thing that you're going to reduce for. And so if you have your final process that you're looking for, now you just have to figure out the interworkings of it, right? So if you bring it back to the root metaphor, it shows that if you don't know the thing that you're looking at, you can't find the inner workings. So when you ask a question from a hypothetical deductive method, and you say what the results are going to be, or when you're using null hypotheses, you say what the results aren't going to be, that frames it to where now I know what I'm looking for. But if you don't know the thing that you're looking at, then you can't dive into it and figure out its inner workings. So that's kind of why that approach lends itself so well to a mechanistic approach.
That makes sense. So, Cameron, are you, how do you feel about the hypothetical deductive model?
So Cameron, do you hate Sidman?
Yeah.
I just feel like that's the way you should have asked that question.
Fuck that guy. I used to love the hypothetical deductive method, but then I read Sidman.
So, and here's the other problem. Does it not make sense that if you start with your conclusion and how you should arrive at that conclusion, that you could follow that path completely to the dismissal of everything else that might be lying along the way?
I have a master's degree in educational psychology, Scott. You don't. Yeah, I'm on your side there.
Okay.
I don't know if you just appealed to your authority or your lack of authority.
I am an authority in bullshit.
Hilarious.
He tries to pull that shit at work every once in a while.
So,
Scott, so now I want you to engage in what would a mechanist say to the way that we ask our questions?
in an
That
inductive model?
they're fucking stupid and we're never going to get to the inner workings and what's actually going on.
I think probably they would say that it doesn't allow you to end up anywhere because you have nowhere to end up. If you don't know, you know...
Give me like an analogy or a metaphor about something simple.
That's hard.
Like, let's say that you wanted to know your guitar string, right? And so you have this broken guitar string,
Okay.
and you say, what would happen if I put this guitar string on, right? And so as you're putting the guitar string on, you're going, and you tighten it at the end, and then the cat walks up to you. And now you start touching the cat. You never learn that the guitar string makes noise. But if you would have plucked another guitar string, then you would have looked at the broken guitar string, and you said, if I string this, it will make noise, right? You're not going to pet the cat because you've got to finish your question. So I think you're 100% right. But I think using a really common sense example of it could make it clearer of how that sounds like a really awesome thing.
I didn't follow that at all.
That you already know everything that there is to know about your subject matter. And that's
I agree. I feel like only I will have followed you through that because I know you so well, though. The simplicity of it was due more to our relationship than the actual explanation.
No, that wasn't simple.
Yeah, I didn't get it at all.
You didn't get it at all?
No.
Well, I think what he was saying is if we look at the inductive approach, that basically we follow where the data go, or what events we observe even. That we see something happening and we start following that in an inductive approach. That's the similar thing of if I'm going to string this guitar, but I see a cat and I start petting the cat instead, like it's a distraction, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if I start with this, this is going to be the conclusion, so now I'm going to make that thing happen. And once I've shown that I make that thing happen, then it actually does happen the way that I thought it was going to. Then you have that direction, you follow the path through that direction, you don't pet the cat, you don't get distracted by it.
So a mechanist would continue stringing the guitar until he made the string make sound, and a contextualist would go off and play with the cat.
It depends on the contextualist you're talking about. But yeah, definitely. You want to be a contextualist now?
Yeah. Guys are selling yourselves very well.
So I'm gonna start telling you at work now.
Well,
Go play with the cat.
Yeah. I'm being inductive, Ryan.
Play with the cat. You're verbal. Play with the cat.
if the question was how do I make sounds, and you start with the answer of by stringing this guitar, but there are in fact other ways to make sounds, the inductive researcher will find all of those ways, including the guitar eventually, but maybe the cat first. And the hypothetical deductive can only do one at a time, and that's the one that they aimed at in the first place.
And to be fair, a truly inductive research question would be more like, if I string the guitar, will it make a sound?
Right.
That you still specify a possibility, but you don't do it in a way that it's the only possibility.
Wouldn't it be even more just like, I wonder what would happen if I put these metal things, or these metal strings on this hollow instrument?
Now you're reducing.
Why is that reducing?
Why is that a better question than a reduction?
Why is mine reduction?
Because you're breaking down this larger thing into smaller things, right? That are the larger thing. So you just reduce the question into other elements.
Okay.
But you can do that.
I was trying to not be terribly specific. Okay, so what happens when I put these strings on this guitar? Was what I was saying.
And this is where I also do not think that there's truly a thing of induction nor of hypothetical deductive models, and it's often a blend of both. Because when you're interested in something, you're interested in it for a reason, and that reason is your history with it.
Right.
And so even when you ask an inductive question, your history with it is still going to be specifying those things.
So I got a question. With my SAFMEDS experiment, I've had a few weird things pop up, and if I wanted to be inductive, is that something I just kind of like note while I'm running my current experiment, and then my next experiment can be like, oh, that was interesting, and let's walk that out or something?
Most people say when you find something interesting, drop everything you're doing and follow that.
That seems so...
If that's more interesting than your other question, then fuck it. Follow that question. But if they're equally interesting, and they're both interesting questions, then you can complete that one and then follow the other one at a later point.
Okay.
So what he's saying is you can play your guitar and then go pet your cat.
Yeah. Or you could say, this guitar is stupid because this cat's way cooler, and then you can go pet the cat. You can do either or and still be following an inductive route.
So now you're stuck because you got to choose which inductive route you want to go.
So if you find something that makes you question, this is kind of like everything that I've read on it. What most people are talking about here is if you find something that's just kind of like, oh, that's cool, but it still supports my question, then keep going and look at that thing later. If you find something that blows your question out of the water and it's like, now this question isn't relevant anymore that I know this, then drop your question and go explore that other thing.
But what about your participants? Because I have participants. But I'd just be like, hey guys, we're doing something else now.
If it's really that cool and you have enough data to conclude that your question that you originally asked isn't that interesting, then fuck it. Terminate the experiment.
Cameron, let's say you were doing a SAFMEDS experiment, and you discovered along the way how to read neural imaging to accurately predict what someone would do. Would you not just stop doing the SAFMEDS project and follow the neuroimaging project?
I would.
So,
Not
like,
that I think that that's something you should do.
Fucking mechanist.
It would be valuable to you.
a cool example of this is Skinner is looking at schedules of reinforcement, which he's already kind of walked out quite a bit. And then he goes and he buys a cheese plate because he was a vegetarian at the time and there wasn't a lot of options. So he goes to a restaurant, gets a cheese plate, and he comes back and he notices a huge spike in his Hume record that schedule didn't predict at all. And he's done a bunch of experiments on this, and all of a sudden there's this crazy fucking spike. So he says, fuck this, and he goes and he looks at the chamber, and he says, holy shit, it's jammed. Like, I can press this all day long, and no food's ever going to come out. So then he goes, and he says, okay, what'll happen if we teach something, and then we just stop delivering that schedule, right? And so now you're looking at extinction. That crazy spike was the interesting thing. His question was, why is there this crazy spike? And then he looked at it, and when he looked at it, he said, oh, why is it jammed? What does the jamming have to do with the spike? Let's see what happens when we teach something and then we jam it, right? Will we get the spike or will we not? What's going to happen there? So he stopped the research that he was doing.
That sounds like he's saying, I bet it's because the machine's
Right.
jammed.
That's the blend. That is the blend. And that's why I'm saying that there's almost never a pure example of induction. It's always a blend with your history. So that's that hypothetical deductive thing, but you don't have to specify that it's going to be this, right? So I'm going to keep doing it until. So it's the specification is what will limit your possibilities of what you explore as a scientist.
Didn't you say that there was like 3 times in which like almost pure induction occurred? It was that one, Sidman's stimulus equivalence, and something with Og. I remember you saying something like that at one point.
Who said that? Me?
Yeah, I was just rambling on a porch one time.
Yeah, that sounds right.
I can't remember what the Og one was.
I remember 2 in a different conversation with Mark, and it was extinction and stimulus.
You were there.
Was I?
Yeah.
I don't remember there being 3 though.
Was there only 2?
You know, you might be thinking of there was a story that Pat McGreevy told in our class about when they were working with when they were figuring out the acceleration chart, where they were trying to figure this thing out, and he said that someone came out saying it was at least an old legend. Maybe someone came out saying logarithms. We can use logarithms. Remember that story?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
It could be that. It could be the chart. I mean, I could see myself saying that. It could definitely be something that I would say.
Or when graphing things on the chart and recognizing that the rate the rate of change was an interesting variable.
Oh, the chart was originally not supposed to show acceleration. They didn't know that acceleration was a thing.
Yeah.
So, angles on the chart.
That's it.
They identified the angles on the chart and they started walking that out. Yes, that's it.
And then the fourth is Cameron did a new SAFMEDS experiment. Yeah, what would happen if
We can't even hear it. We're so busy chuckling.
That'll be the 50-year-old Mark sitting on the porch.
All right, so mechanism, pretty interesting stuff. There was a lot more in there that I found myself agreeing with than I thought I would, but I definitely saw where I couldn't get on board with the truth criterion. And of course, the root metaphor doesn't necessarily agree with me. But there are things within it, especially where it tends to want to go to contextualism, that I find myself agreeing with those statements. So,
Well, and do you think that ever in your life, since you seriously started thinking about behavior, that you were a formist?
do I think I was a formist?
Yeah.
It's possible.
Right. Maybe. I'm guessing there was definitely a point where you were a mechanist.
Mm-hmm.
And
You know,
relating to these things makes sense because we all come from a culture where mechanism is the purview of the way that science is taught to us in the early days.
Yeah, I was making. I was talking last week about how the adequacies of the world hypotheses, as Pepper lays them out, and wondering whether or not formism had the adequacy needed to qualify as a world hypothesis, and I felt like it did. But I also was like, I don't know how often this is the case that anybody is kind of a formist. But then I was kind of thinking the fact that, as he mentions at the beginning of the chapter, formism has intuitive appeal because it's so simple when your metaphor is similarity, that those things probably, I would think that potentially someone who has limited contact or limited history...
Did you hear when Cameron talked about the blind men? Or was that just Cameron, Dom, and I?
Yeah, it's just us.
Okay. Cameron, you want to tell him about the blind men? You should have it memorized by now.
It's from the Gold Diamond second chapter, I think, from the Blue Books. Have you read that?
Have I read that?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, no, which is really bad because I'm presenting on it in 2 weeks.
I knew that was coming up. Dude, I just want you to know Joe Langby is so proud of you right now. He would. Because when I talked with him, he said, you always pick something that's above you and you're not ready for. You're there, dude. We're all there. I told him that's how we all roll in Brohaven.
Yeah.
Let's hear about the blind man.
Have you ever heard the, I don't know, fable of the 6 blind men that are all touching an elephant and kind of interacting with different parts of it and conclude different things about it?
Yeah. I have another similar story that I think I got from the Cooper book, but go ahead.
Yeah, so, shoot, I already forgot what that original fable, what the moral of that fable is. What is it, Mark?
And what?
That, the original fable that they just tell, that is said everywhere and not just in Gold Diamond's interpretation.
Oh, that people working independently and not together won't yield things. That's essentially what the idea is.
Yeah, so one guy's touching an ear, he thinks it's a fan. One's touching a tusk, he thinks it's a sword. One's touching the trunk and thinks it's a snake. They think the legs are pillars, the flank of the elephant is a wall, and so on and so forth. Then he brings in the systematizing 7th blind man. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And they try to they bring together all the evidence that's available, the 6 different pieces of evidence and try to make it into a coherent theory, which would kind of go back to mechanism and the truth criteria of coherence. And so they try to put all these things together, and they come up with a theory that this thing that they're all interacting with is actually a snake palace. It's a palace that houses a snake. So the trunk is a snake. The swords are there to protect against predators. The wall and the pillars house the snake. The fan cools off the snake when it's hot. Like, all these things come together and make sense. They're coherent.
He's got this memorized.
Yeah, good.
And then
Office computer.
let's see, that does some stuff, right? Like, there's some use to that. Like, actually, I don't remember that. How that's useful.
So if you thought it was a sanctuary for a snake, you probably wouldn't walk up to it, right? You'd respect it,
Right.
you'd keep distance. So it'd be good in the fact that you probably wouldn't get hurt by it.
Right. Staying away from a snake sanctuary is, like, that's useful, in that staying away from an elephant is also useful. So even though you're not correct about what you're looking at, the advice you get from your coherent theory is good advice in some ways.
Now tell us about the empirical eighths.
The empirical eighth blind guy tries to interact with the phenomenon or the elephant and kind of find ways of affecting it. Is that right? So, like...
Well, the empirical eighth says, well, it could be the temple thing that you're talking about, dude, or it could be a moving measure. And so he says, what will happen if I run at it with a spear?
Yeah. And then
Yep, keep going.
you start testing things to see, that help you learn how to interact with this thing. Like things that can make, like, if you
He
pull an
runs at it
elephant.
with a spear. Then what happens?
I don't remember that part.
Oh, he gets stepped on and dies, and he asks another research question as he's dying.
What was the next research question?
He just says, and as he's dying with his last breath, he asks the next research question. Something along those lines, right? So the idea is that each of the people acting alone are formists. They're looking at this thing and they're touching it. Now, if you think it's a fan, it could be very dangerous because you go up to it and use it as a fan. Pulling on an elephant's ear might get you killed. But at least one of them, the one that thinks it's a cobra, will be able to act functionally in presence of it, right? So formism can lead to functional interactions with your subject matter, but when the next guy comes in and puts it all together, it makes it much more coherent and it leads to more functionality for everybody. The last guy, right, is getting closer and closer and closer and closer and closer to the discovery that not only is this something that you stay away from, but if everybody runs at it with a spear and starts the next research question, eventually you would also learn this is something that you can stay away from in some situations and something that you can interact with in other situations. So now you have the full utility of that thing that you're interacting with. So why I had Cameron bring that up was that formism can allow you to interact with your subject matter effectively. It just doesn't do it as frequently as other things.
Okay. Well, I propose that we conclude our book club meeting and move on to me giving my presentation to these high schoolers.
Cool.
Okay. I'm going to stop this broadcast now.